Hello, everyone. This is the 110th episode of the Soccernostalgia Talk Podcast. As always, this is Sean from Los Angeles and the Soccer Nostalgia blog. Unfortunately, Mr. Paul Whittle from the 1888 Letter blog could not make it this time. For this episode, I interview German sports journalist and author Mr. Nils Suling and German journalist Mr. Christoph Bähr as we discuss the part one of the Otto Rehhagel era as Werder Bremen manager from 1981 to 1988. Mr. Suling is a sports journalist, writer, author, media consultant, media advisor, content creator, and communication for athletes and brands. He is the U.S. correspondent for BILD, BILD.de, BILD TV, Sport BILD, and SONNTAG, and WELT in Germany. He is the author of Wir Helden von Rom. Sorry, I'll let you say that properly so I don't mispronounce it.
It was amazing. It was perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, which it translates to We Heroes of Rome, which is the story of the 1990 World Cup with a foreword by the late Franz Beckenbauer. And Mr. Bähr is a journalist for the Bremen-based newspaper Weser-Kurier. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Nice to having us. Thank you. Thank you so much. I have to add the newspaper where Christoph is working. I started working when I was young. So Weser-Kurier is my home newspaper where I started doing my first articles. So it's like closing a circle for me.
So can you introduce yourselves and your respective trajectory into football?
You said all my jobs, you said my name right, you said the name of my book right. I was born in Bremen, so I grew up with Werder Bremen. I was born in 1973, and I worked as a sports journalist in that area since I was 16. And later for Weser-Kurier, where Christoph is, a great newspaper. And another local newspaper called Kreiszeitung, which is like really famous for their coverage of Werder Bremen. So I work for them too. And then I work since 23, 24 years. I'm working for BILD now, the largest media in Europe. And the last 3 years as a US correspondent, you mentioned that, I moved to the States 3 years ago because my wife is from Alabama. My daughter was born in Alabama. So now I'm living in Birmingham, Alabama, but my heart is still at home in Bremen, a little bit green and white, as we say in Bremen. So yeah, that's me.
Yeah, I wasn't born in the city of Bremen, but I was born in the federal state of Bremen, in Bremerhaven, which is about 50 kilometers away from Bremen. So for me, it was quite clear that I would become a supporter of Werder Bremen. Can't even remember how it really happened. I'm a Werder supporter almost all my life. So if you live that near to Bremen, and it's just Werder's the club, which is the nearest club, the club which played in the Bundesliga at that time. It was quite successful at that time. When I was a child, I was born in 1983. Started playing football and started to become a supporter of Werder. And later on, I started working at the Weser-Kurier, the newspaper at Bremen. For 4 years, I covered Werder as well as a reporter. Right now, I'm doing sports in general. That's me.
Can you describe a brief history of Werder Bremen in the Bundesliga into the late 1970s before we get to the Rehhagel era?
I was a kid and I started Werder Bremen became like a thing for me when I was like 7, 8, 9. So I don't touch the 70s, but since it was a big thing in my family too, that of course you talk and you learn about what's happening at that time. And the funny thing is, after the championship 1965, they had years of being gray. I would say like it was like kind of like nothing really unspectacular. And then in the middle of the 70s, they had a team, they wanted to build up a team with lots of money. So they put like lots of money. They were called like kind of like the Millionäros. Like they put like $1 million of Deutschmark at that time into the team and wanted to build up like a new contender for the championship. And they even were about to sign Günther Netzer at that time. So Günther Netzer already said like, okay, I'm going to come. And but it all failed because Günther Netzer asked to be the publisher of the stadium of the club magazine called Werder Echo at that time. And so therefore, the whole deal failed. I mean, what would happen if Günther Netzer played in the 70s suddenly for Werder Bremen and not for Real Madrid and Mönchengladbach? So that was a crazy time, and that team totally failed, and they didn't do anything good. And actually, it was, yeah, as I said, like a great time until they relegated into the second Bundesliga. So it was kind of like a process where you can tell they didn't get like the success from the 60s transferred into the 70s and had problems to put a decent team together, I think.
Yeah, and we should mention the team that won the Bundesliga. It included Sepp Piontek, the future Denmark manager, and the main other standout was Horst Dieter Hodges. But yeah, it was like you said, it was just a blip in terms of the history of Werder Bremen. They dropped and they played in the Bundesliga to the second division in 1980-81 season. So it was a decline. Now let's get to Otto Rehhagel himself. Can you describe his trajectory as a player and a manager up to 1981?
Rehhagel was a working class kid. He lived in Essen. It's a Ruhr area. And he started playing football there and was quite good defender, hardline defender, as you can say. Not really a friend of the beautiful game, but he was more feared by his opponents. But he made it to the Bundesliga, played for Rot-Weiß Essen, Hertha in Berlin, for Kaiserslautern. Then had to stop playing because of an injury and started to coaching minor teams, and obviously did it quite well and made his way to the Bundesliga, Offenbach, Borussia Dortmund, Bielefeld, and he even was at Werder Bremen for 12 games in the season 1975-76, but only for 12 games to avoid relegation, and then he went on to the next club. He was kind of as we say in Germany, fireman, like Feuerwehrmann. He always went to different clubs to avoid relegation, and when he managed to save them, he went on to the next club. And of course, you have to mention that he is still responsible for the highest loss in the Bundesliga with Dortmund against Mönchengladbach, 0-12. So before he went to Werder in 1981, yeah, he was seen as a talented coach, but he was not that huge as a coach. He was not seen as one of the big coaches in the Bundesliga, I guess.
Yeah, and he also won the DFB Pokal in 1980 with Fortuna Düsseldorf. Can you describe the circumstances of his appointment in April 1981?
It was kind of a thing. Kuno Klötzer was coach at that time. He got into a car accident. So he was in hospital afterwards and they needed a coach. So they called Rehhagel and they thought like, okay, we keep him for a few games until Kuno Klötzer is healthy again and could coach. But then he got there and he got like some success, and you can tell that he touched the team and that the team liked him. So they were like, what we're going to do now? We want to keep him, but we have Kuno Klötzer. And actually, they talked Kuno Klötzer into terminating his contract, like in a very convincing way, to tell like, hey, you're not healthy enough. You need like some time to rest, because then you can come back and you're a bigger coach and you could see like yourself in the Bundesliga and all these things going on. And Kuno Klötzer was like, okay, yeah, okay, you're right. So then that's how they kept Otto Rehhagel. And as Christoph said, he was like kind of like, yeah, the fireman. He was like successful in, yeah, like wherever it was a job, he jumped in. And so in that case, he ended up in Bremen and started like a amazing run over all the years he stayed.
Kind of funny that the biggest coach in Werder's history, he came to Bremen, you can say by accident, by Klötzer's accident as well. So it wasn't really planned, yeah. It was just, yeah, kind of luck.
In his short few months that he was there at the end of that season, he actually promoted Werder Bremen to the Bundesliga. Let's describe the backbone of the players that were already in place that would be the integral parts of this Werder Bremen adventure. We have familiar faces like Dieter Burdenski in goal already, Johnny Otten, a young Thomas Schaff, Norbert Meyer, Uwe Reinders. So was it self-evident that they would become legends for the club at this point?
Obviously, at that time, I mean, they were great. They were a great team, and there's some talented players. I mean, Bodensky did like some caps for Germany already, and you mentioned all the players like Johnny Orton, and there were some more. Benno Müllmann, Yasuhiko Kodera, the Japanese guy, Erwin Koste, that was very good striker at that time. So they had a good team, but it needed like to get the quality out of the team. So and I think the backbone was already good, but I think the main factor of becoming like that successful, they were done by promoting into the Bundesliga again, and then be successful in the next years. That was like a big achievement from Rehhagel, because he could then make these players better. And I mean, Reinders made like national appearances. I think he went to the World Cup in 1980,
Yes,
which was
too.
like a big thing. Like suddenly he was in the team.
Yeah,
So,
and remember, he scored right after coming on against Chile at the World Cup.
You remember that? I don't do that.
At this point in 1981, the Bundesliga is dominated by Rummenigge, Breitner at Bayern Munich, and SV Hamburg of Hrubesch, Kals, and Magath. So what were the club's ambitions at this point?
They wanted to avoid relegation. That's what they said. I mean, they started with a 4-2 win at Gladbach, which was a real surprise. But what Rehhagel said after the match, those were 2 points against relegation. So, yeah, they wanted to stay at the Bundesliga. They didn't really look at becoming champion or even being under the top teams of the league.
Let's take a look at this first season back in Bundesliga with Otto Rehhagel, 1981-82 season. As far as transfers, you mentioned the Japanese striker Yasuhiko Ukudera. He came from Hertha Berlin. Also, a defender, Rigobert Grube, came from Eintracht Frankfurt. As far as departures, Bohdan Machtadler left to join Austrian side Vienna SC, and another goalkeeper, Albert Voss, joined Oldenburg. So not much of a transfer activity, but you already have backbone of players like we mentioned, Budensky, Klaus Fichtel, Karens Kamp, Otten, Benno Müllmann you mentioned, and also as well as Kosted and Reinders. So there's a backbone of a good side, but they're just not perhaps championship winning potential at this point.
No, not at all. That team was like not, of course, not championship potential. But as Christoph said, that was never the goal in the first place. It grew in that case. And in the first year, it was for me, what I remember is it was a decent year. It was ups and downs. And I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, Christoph. Was it the 2-7 loss against Frankfurt at that year? They lost 7-2 against Frankfurt.
Yeah.
Was that so? That was a famous game in Bremen history, because Dieter Bodensky was injured, and so he couldn't play. And so they put in a guy called Hermann Rühlander, and you never heard of him before and never heard of him afterwards, because he played terrible. That poor man was like totally out of his place. They lost 7-2. Next day, Otto Rehhagel stopped talking to him. So he never talked to him again. They let him they hired right after a few days later, they hired the substitute goalkeeper from Frankfurt as a substitute, because they didn't plan to work with Rühlander again. He later had a decent career in minor leagues like SV Meppen and all that. There were some terrible moments in that season. I mean, 7-2.
He wasn't even allowed to train as a goalkeeper anymore. He was a training, and he had to play like as a defender or something. He wasn't allowed to play as a really funny story today. For Rühlander, it wasn't funny at all.
No, that poor guy. And Otto Rehhagel was crucial with things like that. So he wanted to have success, and he didn't like that. And like to act like that and let him play like defender in practice.
They nevertheless finished in the 5th place. So it was a satisfactory return to the Bundesliga.
Yes, they made it into UEFA Cup. I mean, who expected that?
We come to the pivotal second season back in the Bundesliga, the 1982-83 season. We have very important transfers. The double signing from Munich 1860 of Rudi Völler and Wolfgang Sitka. not to mention Frank Neubarth from Concordia Hamburg. Already, we can see these are three important players who would make an impact in the legend of Werder Bremen. This would become a surprise season that could have ended in triumph.
I mean, of course, we have to talk about Rudi Völler. Rehhagel was always good at getting players from the second division or from abroad, like from Austria, later on Andreas Herzog, and he was good at getting players who could really become a star at the Bundesliga, but who weren't a star before. So the players who were he developed players, like Rudi Völler. He was good at 1860 Munich, and now he had to perform at the Bundesliga. You have already to say, at first, Rehhagel even didn't want to sign Völler. He wanted Dieter Schatzschneider, but Schatzschneider had other plans and turned the offer down. So they got Völler, which was, of course, really good transfer for Werder. Sittger and Neubert as well.
And the season starts with that error by Jean-Marie Pfaff and the match against Bayern Munich. Yes. But I guess at that point, no one could foresee the season Werder Bremen would have. However, they give an indication when in January they ended Hamburg's unbeaten run. They slowly clawed their way on top of the table. Towards the end, it was like neck to neck between them and the great SV Hamburg side. They would eventually win the Champions Cup that season as well. And we have to mention that going into the last round of the matches, Werder were playing against Bochum while Hamburg were playing Schalke. And for like 2 minutes, Werder Bremen were champions. This is when Schalke tied a match against Hamburg, while Reinders had scored against Bochum for a 2-1 lead. However, 2 minutes later, Rolf scored for Hamburg, yet the title was theirs. But an amazing season for Werder Bremen, who just lost on the title on goal difference against the European champions.
And unfortunately, Wolfgang Rolf later became assistant coach in Bremen. So he scored for Hamburg and then later became like a big name together with Thomas Schaaf later in the 2000 somethings. So yeah, that was hard. It was a hard season, but it showed, even if they lost, we call it the Schale, the championship is called the Schale in Germany. So it was a success. It was a big success. And to lose against Hamburg, and Hamburg was a super team at that time. Like, as you said, they won the European Cup of Landesmeister and of Champions. And it is a special season, and it showed like it lit up a fire in Bremen too, I think. Like the fan base grew and grew and grew. And to tell an old story, I think I told Shahan before about that. In that year, I went to Werder Bremen practice, and I got 2 autographs, one from Rudi Völler and one from Otto Rehhagel. And Otto Rehhagel, I was a little boy. I was like 7 something, 8 maybe. So I was super shy and walked up to Otto Rehhagel after. So it was all open. Nowadays, you can't have any access to the players. They pass you. If you're lucky, you get an autograph. But I was even on the pitch, I think. And so he signed me an autograph, I don't know, a piece of paper. And he did that to my face. Otto Rehhagel did that when he left me. So I was a little boy like that. In 2004, I met Otto Rehhagel in Athens for an interview afterwards when I was a sports journalist, and he was the national coach of Greece. 2004, we met in Athens for lunch, and I told him the story, and we both laughed, and so it was funny. When he left the restaurant, he came to me, he was like, take care. So he was an awesome person, and these memories of that time, they were kind of like everybody's darling at that time, and they were touchable, and that was a great start for me personally as a fan, and I think in that time I always wanted to work and covering something of Werder Bremen. So that started like for me maybe the dream of becoming a sports journalist also that year. And I think even if they lost the championship, I think maybe Christoph, maybe I'm wrong, but nobody was really sad. It was not like a tearful. We had some tearful second places later, some years later. I think we're going to come to that too. But that was not that tearful.
Yeah, I mean, I was born in 1983. I wasn't, but what I read and what I heard, nobody was sad about that. It was a success. I mean, it was the second season after being promoted to the Bundesliga. And Werder was perceived as a young team playing offensive football. So yeah, it was just a good season for them.
And that season, the likes of Rudi Völler and Johnny Otten, and also, I believe, Norbert Meyer, they were selected for the national team. There was a team that was going places at this point. You mentioned it was not a tearful second place or anything like that. However, did people believe this was just a one-off, or was there an indication that this team was going to build up on this success?
Yes, surely it was not a fluke. So it was nothing like where you suddenly like end up on top and nobody knows why. So in these 2 seasons after they got back to the Bundesliga, you could tell that something is growing. Second place is a big time, but in that time, it was very balanced in that Bundesliga. So it was not like today where you have Bayern Munich win 11 times in a row the championship. At that time, it changes a lot. And I lately talked to Klaus Augenthaler from Bayern Munich and Hansi Flügler of Bayern Munich for my book, actually. So we talked about of Werder Bremen. And they added, like, it was very interesting, their thought on seeing Bremen as a contender. So they said, like, at that time, you had Stuttgart, you had sometimes Mönchengladbach was kind of like in the middle at that time, but they were still there. Köln was a threat. And Bremen and Hamburg, of course, Hamburg. So there was like 5, 6, 7 teams who could end up 2nd or 7th, and it was still like a good season, because then the lower teams were like, it was a little bit a gap between that. But you can tell, and they saw Bremen as something special. And of course, we in Bremen saw Bremen special too. But no, I would say it was not a new powerhouse. Like, it was not like the big thing, but you could tell that people registered them now as being one of the teams who could beat Bayern Munich, who could beat Hamburg, who could end up on top. So I would say, of course, no fluke at all.
Can you describe the beginnings, the early stage of Rudi Völler becoming a national treasure for Germany?
He scored 23 goals in his first season, became the best goal scorer in the Bundesliga. But also as a person, you obviously experienced him at the training ground, Nils. So he was like, you could touch him, as you said. And I talked to a colleague who worked at the Weser-Kurier at that time. I mean, he had the number of Rudi Völler's telephone at home, so he could directly call him, which is today it's impossible to call a player, almost impossible. And quite often then Rudi Völler's wife would go to the telephone and say, no, Rudi is walking with the dog, but he will call you back in like 20 minutes or something. And he really did that. So he was just a nice guy, and he was a great striker, but he was also somebody for the fans. Yeah.
No, sorry to interrupt you.
Okay, so give him a call now. Maybe he can.
Yeah, he can join in.
I can tell it's not showing off, and he's not at all a person like that. He is still super nice. He is like so open and so nice, and somebody like you can talk to. And Sean mentioned it. I wrote a book about the 1990 World Cup, and I talked to him on the phone, and it ended up we were talking suddenly about like family and stuff. So he's very interested in people. Like, he is kind of like, national treasure, as you said. And Christoph mentioned that really good. The whole thing, he was not the first choice. They wanted Dieter Schatzschneider. And that is so crazy to think about now, like all that time later, how Rudi Völler is look at his career. And then first choice was Dieter Schatzschneider. And I don't know if you know how Dieter Schatzschneider looks. He was successful, but he was a totally different guy, and totally different. And not that he's a national treasure in Hanover, where he's still like a legend, but he would never make that. But ask any person in Germany on the street, everybody loves Rudi Völler. And because he is such a likable person, he's kind of like, I think he's in that area close to Franz Beckenbauer. Like, everybody loves Rudi Völler. I want to add one funny thing to what Christoph said is Werder Bremen wasn't his first choice either. So Eintracht Frankfurt already offered him something, and he was like, maybe I go back to Frankfurt, because he grew up close to Frankfurt. And then he decided against Frankfurt because of 2 reasons. One reason was that he played for Kickers Offenbach, and Kickers Offenbach is a big rival for Eintracht Frankfurt, and he at that time already thought, hey, the supporters of Offenbach, they wouldn't like if I would move to Frankfurt. Maybe I do something else. And then one big thing is Otto Rehhagel and his wife Beate met Rudi and his wife. I think it was for lunch or for dinner, something like that. And in that conversation, both of them, Beate and Otto, convinced Rudi how great it is to play for Bremen, because it is something more. They already build up this family character. I think most of the questions you come later is like, always comes back to family. Bremen always felt like a family, and it still feels like kind of like a family. And Otto put that seed at that time by his conversations with that. And I think, I don't know, Christoph, where do you live?
Right now I live in Achim, near Bremen.
And close to Achim is Euten, and Rudi Völler moved to Euten. He didn't move downtown. He didn't move into the city. He moved into the suburbs to the people. So he lived with normal people, and not like, there's a part in Bremen called Oberneuland, and all the years the players lived in Oberneuland because they had like big mansions and all that. Rudi Völler moved to Euten, which is like a sign that he is a normal person, and that made him so special, except for being an unbelievable great striker.
We come to the following season, 1983-84 season, to see if this team can build up on that success. Now, as far as the arrivals, we have Frank Ordenowitz moves up from the youth side. More importantly, the Austrian defender Bruno Petzai arrives from Eintracht Frankfurt, as well as Matthias Rolander, a defender from Wolfsburg. The only departure is defender Martin Haskamp, who goes to Oldenburg. And Werder Bremen also competes in the UEFA Cup. However, they are eliminated in the second round to East German side Lokomotiv Leipzig after eliminating Malmo in the first round. That season, they finish in the 5th place, just enough to make the UEFA Cup. What was the consensus after such a high in the previous season? And like I said, it was still a satisfactory season where they qualified to Europe.
I mean, the season was okay. You can see there's this season of consolidation, maybe. Like, they were playing very offensive football, and now they started to find a new way of playing, not attacking all the time. Like Berger always said, yeah, controlled offensive, yeah, kontrollierte Offensive. They started to develop this style of play, which made them champions in 1988. So yeah, it was not a spectacular season. It was 5th place was okay. I guess it was quite important to get Bruno Petzai, because he was already a star at the Bundesliga. So you could see that I was now capable of getting good players who were also kind of good players at the Bundesliga. There were more money involved because they played in the UEFA Cup, and yeah, it was a sign that there was something to develop. But yeah, you couldn't really say where it would end up. Yeah, they were kind of one of the best 5 or 6 teams in the Bundesliga, but yeah, it wasn't really clear if it can make it to the top, or if it maybe goes a bit down. It was a season of consolidation.
Now we come to the 1984-85 season. Now, as far as arrivals, we have defender Michael Kutzup, who arrives from Kickers Offenbach, and Thomas Wolter, who comes from HEBC Hamburg. The players who leave included Klaus Fichtel, who joins Schalke, and Karl-Heinz Kamp also retired. This would be a season where Werder Bremen bounced back, and again, they would fight out with Bayern Munich for the Bundesliga title, eventually finishing 2nd. But they just scored so many goals that season. Very offensive team, just missing out on the title. Also in the UEFA Cup, they lost to a very strong Anderlecht side on the away goals rule, which was no shame. Remember, Anderlecht had won the UEFA Cup in 83 and finished runners-up in 84. So they were a very strong team.
I think like when you mentioned lots of goals, and Christoph just said it, and I think that is right. It's like they scored so many goals because they had such a good defense. So that was like they had like a super defense, and out of that, they had the chance to score with like, how do you translate it? Kontrollierte Offensive. Controlled offense. Translated one-on-one, it's like Dinglish, German English. It's like, I don't even know what that was, but it's like kind of like, in that they were so massive in the defense, and then they were so fast and strong playing forward. And I think that was the key, what Christoph just mentioned, that the last season showed they built up brick by brick a team where you can tell, I mean, all the names you mentioned before every season, it's just like no fluctuation. It's just like 2 come in, 2 go out, 3 come in. So Otto Rehhagel found like certain spots to make the team always better. And if somebody, the names who were gone were mostly like players who didn't play a major role. Or Klaus Wichtel was, I don't know, how old was he? 50 when he left Bremen. So he was for quite a time the oldest player in Germany until Karl-Heinz Körbel played, I think. Like he was really old, but he was awesome. But he was like, he built up a team step by step. And in that season now, 84, 85, Bayern Munich was like ahead at the end of 6 points, and then, or 4 points, and 4 points, and Cologne was back 6 points. So Bremen was kind of like in the middle of not really reaching the top, but also like dominating what everything was behind them. I think that will sum it up.
We come to the 1985-86 season.
No, we can talk about that. You know that is like strictly, we can talk about it.
Well, this could have been the season where they finally won the Bundesliga, but of course we know what happens. It's a case of a penalty kick miss and an injury to Rudi Völler by foul by Klaus Augenthaler, if I'm not mistaken.
No, you're right.
As far as the arrival, we have Mirko Votava returning to the Bundesliga from Atletico Madrid. Oliver Reck, the heir apparent to Dieter Burdenski, is signed from Kickers Offenbach. Dieter Eltz moves up from the youth team or the second team. And in November, Manfred Burgsmüller arrives from Rot-Weiß Oberhausen, and he would be a pivotal player for the years to come, despite his advanced age. As far as departures, Uwe Reinders joins French side Bordeaux. Norbert Sigmund joins Fortuna Köln. And defender Dirk Lelek joins Hertha Berlin. That season, the key match is the penultimate match on April 22nd, match day 33. Bremen is hosting Bayern Munich. If you like to say what happens.
Not me. No, I can. Sorry, I could tell. Christoph,
did you watch the match, Nils?
No.
At that time?
No, I mean, at that time, it's like, so there was one soccer show or like a sports show called Sportschau, which was on Saturday night. And Saturday night, they only showed 3 games. So if you were lucky, they showed your team. If not, you just saw the result and they told you something about the game. So I think that was a Friday night game when I recall it right. Or like it must be a week game, because I was laying in bed and listened to the radio. And I knew I had school next day. So it must be like maybe Saturday morning school or something. In Germany, we had Saturday morning school, by the way. And when it happened, so it was 0-0 until like 88 minutes, which was, I think, enough to win the championship, right? We needed a tie. Suddenly, the commentator screamed like, "Oh my gosh, it's a penalty. I jumped up on my bed, up and down. I was so excited about it. I was 8, 9, 10. Ugh. So Michael Kutzer, who was the best penalty shooter ever. So I think he never missed before. And I was thinking he never missed afterwards. Mm-hmm. So he got to the point, he shot, and you could hear that boom of the post. Like you could hear it. It was kind of like kind of like in a horror movie. It was quiet and you could hear it on the radio. And I don't even know who of them. We have some radio legends in Bremen at that time. I don't know who it was. If it was Walter Jasper, the great Walter Jasper, I loved. But I was sitting there and crying. I was crying that they missed, and that game was it was a handball from Sören Lerby at the actually, which was not really clear, but if it was or not. So now you never know. So they tied 0-0. Bayern Munich was super excited, and Werder was shocked. And then on the last match day, Bayern Munich won and Werder lost against Stuttgart. And I felt it was we at that time for me. We lost the championship. And now when we mentioned the not tier 4 missed championship a few years ago, and now the second place again, that was tier 4 because we were centimeters away from that. And there is a funny story about Michael Kutzau at the farewell season party. Werder Bremen was like together, and Otto Rehhagel came up with a contract. So he got the contract of Michael Kutzau in his hand, and before everybody, he just tore it apart, and everybody was shocked. And he was like, "No, I'm joking, Michael. You're gonna be my penalty shoot guy for the next years. I trust you, and the whole team trusted you." And there was never any bad blood towards Michael Kutzau. So personally, he suffered for years after that because he knew that he was responsible for that. But nobody at Bremen blamed him, and that showed again how. And I mentioned that before, this family character in that team, that was awesome. And then that night, I remember Michael Kutzau drove home with Rudi Völler and spent the night at Rudi Völler in the kitchen, and they were sitting together, and Rudi's wife, I think Angela at that time, she cooked something for them, and they had a beer, and they were so close. And Rudi Völler was like one of the best friends of Michael Kutzau. They later worked together. I think Michael Kutzau was like the head of his soccer school on Mallorca or somewhere. So they were close, and nobody ever blamed Michael Kutzau for that. And now I can laugh about it, but my 10-year-old self, I was crying terribly in my bed.
Good point with the soccer school. I was at that soccer school when being like 13 or 14 years old.
Amazing.
Michael Kutzau was there to manage everything. And of course, he talked to us. And someone asked him about this penalty in 1986.
Oh my God.
And I mean, it was like 10 years ago or so. But he said the sound of the ball hitting the post, he can still hear it. It's still in his head. Obviously, he will never forget it. So, I mean, if he had scored, it would have been the title. So, yeah. And as you have to mention the first match against Bayern at Munich. There was those foul from Augenthaler against Rudi Völler, who was injured for 5 months. And yeah, that was kind of the start of this big rivalry between Werder and Bayern, because Uli Hoeneß after that said, played it all down and said wasn't that bad. But I mean, Rudi Völler was out for 5 months. His first he could play after this injury was the second match where we talked about. So he came on as a sub, and I guess he even played the ball which Lerby which hit the hand of Lerby or something. So unbelievable story. And I mean, I was too young at the time. I was 3 years old. But I guess if you experience all that as a supporter, as a fan, must have been really, really hard.
Now that you mentioned that, Rudi once said that it was no handball. So he was like, since his short touches Lerby's arm or hand, he said there was no handball. So looking back, kind of like maybe it was a little bit of justice in that moment, but hard as a Werder fan.
And we should mention that again, that season, once again, Werder Bremen lost the title on goal difference. They were level on points with Bayern Munich, both 49 points. But yeah, goal difference gave the title to Bayern. Was it after this third runner-up position that Otto Rehhagel earned the nickname Otto Rehhagel II? Was it around this time?
It was already in 84, 85. He was called Otto II, but obviously after 1986, those nicknames became popular. Yeah, the media was writing a lot about it, and I guess Rehhagel didn't like it. I mean, as you can see, so must be maybe at that time that he couldn't really, he didn't like journalists, or most of them. So maybe it started at that time because he was just like annoyed from all those articles about Werder and him and not being able of winning titles and always finishing on second position was like Bayer Leverkusen later on. Yeah, Werder at the 80s seen as always being second.
We come to the 1986-87 season, where it's similar to the 1983-84 season, where you have a high finish, but somewhat of a drop from the previous season. As far as the arrivals, we have defender Dieter Schlindwein arrived from Waldorf Mannheim. Later on in the new year, Norwegian defender Rune Bratseth joins from Rosenborg. And as far as the departures, Okudera returns to Japan around this season. As far as in Europe, Werder Bremen is eliminated in the first round to Atletico Madrid. But as far as the league season, again, Bayern Munich wins it more comfortably this time, and Werder Bremen finishes at the fourth place.
So you mentioned one name which became a legend.
Bratseth.
Like, Rune Bratseth is, I would say, from all the players ever were hired by Werder Bremen. And we talk about Diego and Mesut Özil and Joe Miku and all these great players, Ailton. We can name them all. I would say Rune Bratseth is one of the, if he's not number one, he's like one of the, he was one of the best players they ever had, but also because he was a mixture. He was the fastest player. I think there was never a faster player than him. And he was a tall guy, and I don't know how tall he was. And he was fast, and he was so smart. And he was the anchor of that team who later won the championship. I don't want to spoiler us, but like we know they won at one point. They won it. And they won it because that was, again, one of these key players Otto Rehhagel picked. With that, him, and you mentioned Manfred Burgsmüller before, and that is like what Christoph said before, is something like Otto Rehhagel had that talent to find players who nobody knew, like second Bundesliga, Austria, Norway, somebody who nobody really know about. And it's not like today. Today you can Google the stats and watch the highlight from everybody, and they're all transparent. If you're 16 and you score some goals, you know that people know that you exist. But at that time, they had good players somewhere in the world, and he found them. And also he found players who were, where you think like over their prime. Manfred Burgsmüller, where you think like, oh, really? Manfred Burgsmüller? He was old at that time, but he was that puzzle piece fitting together in that attacking area where he was leading the younger players, where he had these awesome moments. We will later touch with one of the miracles in Bremen where he was involved. He was always like something special, same as Rune Bratseth. And therefore, it was another year of growing. It's hard to say, because it is, we're talking about now, oh, they finished fourth. Is that bad? I wouldn't think that it was bad, because they established themselves as one of the teams in Germany over the years. Second, fifth, second, fourth. I don't know. They will do another second, fifth over the years. But it is a year where, again, nobody was really disappointed, because what they did was exciting. And I think that they grew, and in whole Germany, I think at that time, people started liking Werder Bremen more and more and more and more and more. And that is like one of the takeaways for me through these years, except for, finishing like fourth. So it was no disappointment in that way.
Yeah, maybe the team kind of had to kind of rest a bit, like after those 1985-86 season. I mean, it was kind of a shock. Of course, the expectations were high. They finished on second. I mean, you could say now they have to win the title, but I mean, you have to understand it was kind of a shock. The fifth place is still a good result, as you say. So, and Rune Bratseth, it's quite the same with me. I mean, I played as a defender. He was kind of an idol for me at that time. Such a good player, and I talked to Mirko Votava about Bratseth. Nobody knew him And he came to the training ground for his first training session, and nobody knew him. All the other players, was looking at him and what kind of player is that? And then they saw him play, and Otava said they immediately know it's a special player. So, and you have to find someone like that in Norway. I don't know how Otto Rehhagel managed that, but just great.
Yeah. He was the Haaland of the 90s. So like if he would play now, he would be worth hundreds of millions because he would be the best defender in the world, I think.
At that time, you couldn't see how fast the players were running. Yeah, now you know it's 35 kilometers per hour or something. I would really want to know what Rune Bratseth would be capable of running because he was so fast.
Yes, he was.
However, the sale of Rudi Völler was inevitable, and he would join AS Roma in the Serie A. Now, at the time, was there a fear that without him, Werder Bremen would no longer have a chance to win the Bundesliga?
I wouldn't say it was a fear, but of course, if the biggest player, the striker, the goal guarantee goes and leaves, of course you have the feeling like every team like, oh, well, what's happening now? But the thing is in Bremen, I think in that season they got Karl-Heinz Riedle. He came from Blau-Weiß 90 Berlin, I guess, and he was already a good player. And we all knew, like, lots of people know what happened to Karl-Heinz Riedle. He became world champion in 1990. He won the Champions League with Dortmund, played in Italy. So he played in Liverpool. He was one of the best strikers at his time. And that's again like a thing that is a Rehhagel thing. Rehhagel saw him and Rehhagel knew that will fit. And you could tell after the first games in that combination in the offense, I would say, maybe I'm wrong, but I think it was Riedle was there, Burgsmüller was there, Ordenowitz was still there, Neubart was still there. I mean, these are big players and so different players. Like Neubart tall, Ordenowitz like more like fast on the wings, and then Riedle in the middle, and he was like already great in his headers. He could jump high. And he finished, I think, the season second in the scoring list right after Jürgen Klinsmann. So you could tell that the substitute Rehhagel got for him for Rudi Völler was a great choice already.
But that's true. But you have to say before the season started, I guess the media was quite pessimistic. I found that the kicker did a story which was ratlos ohne Rudi. I mean, you have to translate like helpless without Rudi or something. So they thought maybe Werder couldn't replace him. Then there was this story at the magazine Stern, like also hard to translate, antreten zum Abtakeln, like it's ready to unrig or something. Yeah, so it was before the season. I talked to the author of that story, Martin Hegele. After that article, he was kind of persona non grata at Werder Bremen for several years because he managed to take the whole team and all the officials to a sailing ship in sailor uniforms, and they did a photo shooting, and everybody thought it would be a nice story at the beginning of the season. Something nice. And then it was kind of Werder Bremen is dead. The miracle is over. Rehhagel doesn't know anymore what to do. Rudi Völler has gone, and they will go down. Yeah. So before the season started, I guess the media was quite pessimistic, but on the other hand, it seemed to have been kind of motivation for the team because Rehhagel was good at creating a team, creating a family, and was always kind of like us against them. So there was a team on the one hand, and on the other side, there was the media and all the people, the other clubs. So yeah, maybe it helped him. Yeah, but at a certain point, so when the story was published at the magazine Stern, Werder, the officials, Willy Lemke and so on, they were really, really angry about that.
So let's come to this title-winning season, 1987-88. In addition to Karl-Heinz Riedle, Otto Rehhagel makes another key signing, future international Uli Borowka from Mönchengladbach. In addition to Rudi Völler leaving, we have Wolfgang Sitka, Bruno Petzai, and later on, Benno Mollmann are also players who leave the team. At this point, Otto Rehhagel installs Oliver Reck as a starter ahead of Dieter Bordensky. Along with Borovka, you have Bratseth, Kutsup, still have Otten, Schaff, Gunnar Sauer. In midfield, you have Günther Hemmen, Norbert Meyer, who would not make many appearances that season, if I seem to remember. But Dieter Eltz, Mirko Votava, Burgosmüller at the age of 38, scoring key goals, coming on as a joker. Neubarth would earn an international cap that season, as did Frank Ordenovitz, I believe, when they toured Brazil and Argentina in late 87. I could be wrong about that. But with Riedl up front, dream season for Werder Bremen. They would be challenging with Köln and Bayern Munich. But I would say, from early on, it seemed like Werder Bremen were ahead in the standings. And for the first time in Europe as well, in the UEFA Cup, Werder Bremen did better than the previous seasons. They eliminated Spartak Moscow. They eliminated Dinamo Tbilisi, Italian side Verona, and ironically lost in the semifinals to Bayer Leverkusen. However, the match against Spartak Moscow is remembered as one of those wonders of Weser. I'm sure you can explain that better, what that means to Werder fans, this concept.
Yeah, it means matches in the evening, rainy days, cold days, and often a first match where you lost very I guess it was 1-4 at Moscow, and nobody really believed in Werder anymore, and then they managed to win 6-2 at the Weserstadion, the extra time. So was it was the first wonder of the Weser, and there were several more about to come, but it was kind of something special about this team. Could never really, they never gave up, obviously. Yeah? I mean, normally you don't have a chance if you lose that clear to such a strong team as Spartak Moscow was at that time. But yeah, they weren't obviously, they had characters in the team who always strong characters, like Mirko Votava, who was the captain later on, or Rune Bratzit, we talked about him. Yeah, you could never be sure. You could never really be sure that you beat this team. There were always kind of the spirit, and that started with this match against Spartak Moscow. I don't know, Nils, were you at the stadium at the time? No, I don't think so. You were too young. Or?
TV. I watched it on TV. I read these week games like the UEFA Cup, and they were on TV at that time. So we had 3 programs in Germany. Isn't it sad? Only and there were, I think they switched up the program at midnight or something. They played the anthem. It was terrible. Now to add on, it's interesting. After that game, I remember reading it one time that Otto Rehhagel called that success. It was as important as the championship in 1965. So that game was very, very big for everybody, especially Rehhagel. That was, of course, before they won then the championship finally, but it was special. And then that night, something I read also, because I was watching TV, people who were watching it on TV came to the stadium and gathered outside of the arena, outside of the Weserstadion on the Deich, Osterdeich. People gathered during that game when they realized that there's this wonder, this miracle happening. Das Wunder von der Weser. And Christoph is right. We had like several of them. And actually later, hopefully we talk about it later, I was there at some of them later when I was older. But at that time, I missed it. But that was special. And after like playing in Moscow with like -8 Celsius, and they had like terrible flight there. I think they were stuck in Lithuania or somewhere on the way. So it was hard travel. And when they came back, and nobody expected that they could do something. And that was Rehhagel again, enlightening the fire of that miracle and at that night.
So that in a way helped Werder to win the title in a way, if it galvanized the team at that point.
I think that shows like that spirit at that time, and yeah, as you said, like it started something that night, I think, was a big part of the success later, because it showed like they were strong and had like a strong chest at that time.
Yeah. So now at this point, you're a teenager and you witness your team win the Bundesliga. Can you describe that feeling or how you celebrated, etc.?
That's interesting. I don't remember. I mean, I think like everybody knows some certain moments where they watched something or witnessed something and where they have been and who was there. And I remember I've been several times in the arena at that age. I was 15, so I know that. And I was in school, it was a big thing. I was always at school a little bit sympathizer with Bayern Munich also. So it was, for me, it was always a successful season because it was whether Bayern or whether Bremen. It started with me loving Karl-Heinz Rummenigge when I was a kid. But I know that it was a big thing for us. It was a big thing because it was the first championship. I know that it was a big celebration. I haven't been to that party. I was too young. I was later at some parties. They gathered at the Marktplatz, at the town square, and it was like a big celebration. And I remember that I was very happy, like really happy. It was a great time.
And I imagine, Christoph, you were too young at that point, but were you at least conscious of what was going on, or?
Yeah, I was 5 years old. I started playing football at that time. And of course, I heard of Werder winning the title and I was kind of happy about it. But yeah, that's all I can say. What I remember is that we had like beer coasters with all the players. So after Werder won the title, so my parents somewhere got those beer coasters where were the heads of all the players on. So that's what I remember of the team of 1988. So I've still all those faces in my head. But yeah, obviously I was too young to watch the matches or something.
This 1987-88 title was finally the confirmation of Rehhagel's work after 7 years. So I imagine the press was off his back at this point.
Christoph is really good in reciting all the press from that time. I'm sure he has something in petto for us. Now, I want to add something. We can't forget one name, and I think that's important too. It wasn't only Otto Rehhagel, it was also Willy Lemke. Willy Lemke, in Germany, you have a coach and a manager. The manager is doing the transfers and everything around, and the coach is just coaching. It's different, like
right, the technical director in some.
You would call it like that now like that. But he was the manager, and they built that team over the years. They built that success together. So that was really connected. You had also the president, Franz Böhmert, and the vice president, Klaus-Dieter Fischer. They all played a big role from the top, leading that whole club into becoming the champion. And Willy Lemke is important because Willy Lemke was always, I don't even know the English word for it, or like if there's a saying, he's a Schlitzohr. So it's like he was like always ahead of things, and he was planning things, and he was involved in the transfers also. And so for both of them, it was, they became legendary by winning this championship together. And again, I repeat myself, but it shows like how it grew as a family. And Christoph said that before, and I wanted to add on that is, after a negative article before the season, the journalist was a persona non grata. So they were out, they were not talked to. And so that is like what Bremen was. They were like us against the world. And if somebody was criticizing us, or if we got bad press, they're out. So that was especially like Rehhagel did that really good. Later years, Thomas Schaaf, who became like next in the 2000s, like the big coach in Bremen, he did the same. So he was like, this is us and that's you. And if there's something coming towards us, we defend our families. And Rehhagel once said like, hey, as a player, I criticize you as much as I want to. But as human beings, you are so important. It's kind of like you're holy for me. And I want to make that sure that you're persons also which I admire, But when it comes to soccer, you follow me and you listen to me. And that's what got into that championship at that time.
I talked to Thomas Schaaf about Rehhagel and the title in 1988, and he said, like Nils said, the most important thing was that Otto was always protecting the team. Yeah, it was kind of family, and that's what Schaaf did when he was the coach. He did the same. Yeah. Talking about the media, of course, they were celebrating the team. They were celebrating Otto Rehhagel. Everybody had waited for the title, so now it was there. If you look at the archive of the Weser-Kurier, there are articles like, party at the whole city of Bremen. Yeah, those pictures with people everywhere in the city center, and it was just a big party, and everybody was kind of relieved that finally Werder had won a title and they were not the second anymore, and it was not Otto the second anymore. So I guess it was a very, very important moment, the first title for Rehhagel and for Werder with Rehhagel. So yeah, I mean, you have to say that they conceded 22 goals in the whole season, 34 matches. It was Oliver Reck who played his first season as a keeper. Bodinsky was on the bench, and was just a great defense. I mean, Gunnar Sauer was a really, really good defender, but yeah, he had a lot of injuries in the upcoming years. So otherwise, he probably would have played for the national team and so on. Yeah, you had Borowka, Bratic, so it was just a great team. Especially the defense was really, really good.
Yeah. Speaking of Gunnar Sauer, he was in 1988. He was both in the Euro squad and also the Olympic squad, but he never made a single appearance.
He was injured. He was injured before the Olympic Games, so he was at the squad, but he couldn't play. That's what his and then I guess that's where it started. After that, he had several injuries and he couldn't really play a whole season after that.
Now, in addition to the Bundesliga title, Bremen also did well in Europe that season. So now, were there genuine ambitions for future European success from this point onwards?
I mean, if you like make it to the semifinals, I guess you have ambitions. It was different. It was UEFA Cup was always really hard at that time, and I actually missed that whole competition because it was these back and forth games, and you played like they had like over the years Dundee United in Scotland or Borlänge in Sweden, like some opponents where you're not like woo, and they were unpredictable, and sometimes you could. It was not easy to go through all these competitions. You see, there was always something special happening. I think in that year, Espanyol Barcelona lost against Leverkusen in the finals. Am I right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
it was Espanyol Barcelona was not the first address of Spanish soccer, but they made it far because it was special. And then sometimes you played like in Moscow with -8 degrees Celsius, and it was cold. And then next round you play in like kind of like in Spain. So it was different. And of course, it was not pressure, but of course, the more success you have, the more you feel like, oh yeah, next season we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And every season when you got like the first draw of the next round, like UEFA Cup, like, oh yeah, that's an easy one. And then I remember myself like looking at the first 5 opponents in the Bundesliga, and I was like, oh yeah, that's a 10-0 start. They're going to win all the games. It wasn't that easy, actually. And of course, they had, dreams. And dreams are good, I think, like especially in soccer. And you're confident if you win, if you make it to the semis, you know that you can do something. And Bremen was always a cup team. So they were always good in DFB Pokal, in the German Cup. They were always good in, they could achieve something. So the belief was there.
In closing, following this title win, was there a belief that Rehhagel could build up on this success, or was there a feeling that perhaps this was the end of a cycle?
Yeah, I would say there was kind of the feeling that there was more to come, because they had those older players like Burgsmüller, but they also had a couple of younger players who came from the Werder youth teams, like Dieter Eils, Günther Hermann, Gunnar Sauer, and so on. So there were players who were still able to become better and better. And yeah, we had those semifinals in the UEFA Cup. So of course they had won the league in 1988, but there was still more possible, and there was still things to do. So I guess it wasn't seen that Rehhagel's time was already over. There was more to come.
Yeah, I agree on that. I think that was no doubt. I mean, we all know that there's cycles in football and soccer, however we call it, that there's always like a peak, and then it's hard to stay on top. But Bremen proved over the years, since Rehhagel was there, they stayed there. And in these years, it was only Bayern Munich who played like as big as role as Bremen did, and all the others, Hamburg and Cologne, they were more like that. So I think the belief was not that there were no. Of course, there's something like Christoph mentioned it before, before the season. I mean, we both are media, or like we work for media. We know that you have to analyze things, and you have to question things, and you have to create a little bit like suspense and all that. But in that case, of course, yeah, people looked at like, oh, will the older players make it next season? But also like, oh yeah, there are young players. So it was kind of like, it didn't feel like it was an overachievement. It felt like, oh yeah, that was deserved, and now there's more to come. And I think that was the takeaway from that championship. And now looking back, we knew there was more to come.
With that, we're done with the first half of the Otto Rehhagel era. In a subsequent podcast, we'll discuss the second half of Otto Rehhagel's era at Werder Bremen from 1988 to the end at 1995. So once again, I would like to thank both of you for your participation in this interview. As always, feel free to leave questions and comments. All our respective contact information are listed on the blog and podcast uploads, including the link to Mr. Suling's new book. So
thank you.
Thank you once again. This was a nice trip down the memory lane.
Yes, thank you so much. It was fun. It was, I learned some things. So Christoph knew some stuff, and all the names you dropped. It was a great trip down memory lane. And I am excited about next time we meet. And I want to talk about the next years. So we have lots of miracles to come.
Indeed. Thank you once again.
Thank you. It was fun.